So I want to start by asking you, the listener, a pretty weird question. Have you ever been staring at a spreadsheet that is due in, like, exactly 1 hour, and instead of actually typing the data, you catch yourself secretly mapping out which local hardware store you would loot first during a zombie apocalypse?
Oh, I think we've all been there, like actually sitting at a desk and debating the merits of a crowbar versus a machete.
Yes. Or, mentally categorizing which of your coworkers would actually make the cut for your post-apocalyptic survival team.
It's a shockingly common daydream, honestly. And frankly, it perfectly captures one of the most profound and deeply human contradictions of modern life. I mean, we live in the safest era in human history, yet we constantly fantasize about its total destruction.
Right. Or think about what happens late at night. You're exhausted, your eyes are burning, you know you need to be up for work in 6 hours, but you were just endlessly scrolling through catastrophic news headlines on your phone.
Doom scrolling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's miserable. It is terrifying.
Yeah.
But you literally cannot look away. It's like we have this bizarre, deep-seated obsession with the end of the world.
And we often treat that behavior as a personal failing, don't we? We call it a guilty pleasure, or we say it's just a lack of discipline. But from a clinical and psychological standpoint, what you are describing isn't a modern moral failing at all.
No.
Not at all. It is ancient biology desperately trying to make sense of an environment it completely fails to recognize.
And that right there is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to explain the why and the how behind our modern brain's utter obsession with the apocalypse.
Right. We're going to unpack the biological, the psychological, and the cultural reasons behind this apocalyptic longing that so many of us feel.
To do this properly, we are synthesizing a really fascinating stack of source material today. First, we are looking at a deep dive ethnographic study analyzing the architecture and sociology of multi-million-dollar doomsday bunkers.
Which is wild, and we are pairing that with psychological research on a massive concept called evolutionary mismatch. We also have a brilliant piece of research from Nautilus on why horror movie fans actually experience better mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, that one completely blew my mind. And finally, we're going to look through the lens of literary critique to see how modern post-apocalyptic fiction acts as a mirror for our daily lives.
So if you are listening to this right now, here is the promise we're making to you. By the end of this conversation, you are going to understand exactly why your daily mundane anxieties, your Netflix queue, and the booming billion-dollar doomsday prepper industry are all intimately connected.
Connected to the exact same ancient survival instincts. It is a journey that connects our deepest evolutionary past to our immediate future.
But to truly grasp why we might actively fantasize about the collapse of civilization, we have to start by looking at the piece of hardware that is perceiving the world right now.
The human brain.
Exactly. We have to understand the caveman sitting in the cubicle.
The caveman in the cubicle. I really love that phrasing. Because living in cities with Wi-Fi and food delivery apps, we tend to view ourselves as incredibly advanced, right? Like we're entirely removed from nature.
We do, but the research slaps us with a massive reality check regarding our timeline. For over 90% of human history, we are talking hundreds of thousands of years. We lived exclusively as nomadic hunter-gatherers.
And that timeline is the foundational key to this entire discussion, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I mean, Homo sapiens have been around for roughly 300,000 years. The agricultural revolution, when we first started settling down and farming, was only about 10,000 years ago.
Which is pretty recent in the grand scheme of things.
Very recent. The Industrial Revolution was a mere 200 years ago, and the digital smartphone era, barely 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah, from an evolutionary perspective, 15 years is not even a fraction of a blink. It's nothing.
So our hardware hasn't updated at all.
Exactly. Human biology and neurology evolve incredibly slowly. Our brains are biologically hardwired almost exclusively for the environment of our ancestors.
And that was a world of small, tightly knit nomadic bands, usually 25 to maybe 50 people.
Right. In that world, survival was a very tangible, daily, highly physical pursuit.
Meaning the threats they faced were immediate and physical. A predator rustling in the brush, a sudden drop in temperature, a rival group encroaching on your territory.
Precisely. You are biologically optimized to detect and react to acute life-or-death physical threats. But then, Fast forward to today.
Right, totally different environment.
Completely different. We have artificial lighting that disrupts our sleep, digital screens bombarding us with global tragedies, and most importantly, our stressors are no longer physical, they are abstract.
Like, I don't have to outrun a saber-toothed tiger on my way to the studio, but I do have to worry about a vaguely worded email from my boss or an impending mortgage payment.
Or this looming invisible cloud of inflation and financial debt. Which brings us to the core scientific concept here, evolutionary mismatch.
Let's break that down.
Well, because human biology evolves so much slower than human culture and technology, our primal brains become profoundly confused. I mean, they do not know what a mortgage is.
So they just interpret these modern, abstract, chronic annoyances using the only alarm system they have.
Exactly. The life or death physical threat response.
There is a statistic from the source material that absolutely stopped me in my tracks when I read it. The researchers were looking at clinical depression, and they found it is almost non-existent among traditional hunter-gatherer groups operating today.
It really is staggering.
Right. They conducted an exhaustive ethnographic and psychological study of the Kaluli people in Papua New Guinea. Out of 2,000 people interviewed and assessed using Western diagnostic criteria, only one person met the threshold for clinical depression.
1 in 2,000.
1 in 2,000. But if you look at industrialized nations like the US or the UK, that number jumps to over 5% of the population.
And we really have to ask why that gap exists. It is not because the Kaluli people live utopian lives free of sadness.
Of course not. They experience grief, they experience loss, they experience physical pain.
But what they don't experience is the chronic, abstract, inescapable stress of modern industrial life. Their stressors are episodic and resolvable.
This mismatch isn't just in our heads, though. The sources dive into how deeply physiological this is. Can you explain the thirsty gene hypothesis? Because that completely changed how I view my own metabolism.
The thrifty gene hypothesis is a perfect example of evolutionary mismatch. Think about early humans. Food was scarce and unpredictable.
So you had to eat whatever you could find.
Right. If you stumbled upon a massive source of calories, say a patch of ripe, sugary fruit or a large animal, the humans who had genes that prompted them to gorge on that food and efficiently store the excess energy as visceral fat were the ones who survived.
They survived the inevitable famine that followed.
Exactly. So your body naturally wants to hoard calories because it assumes winter is always coming. It is a brilliant famine survival machine.
The problem is, modern society has engineered a world where the famine never arrives.
Right. We live in a calorie-rich environment filled with highly processed, hyper-palatable foods. So those exact same thrifty genes that saved your ancestors are now the primary drivers of metabolic disorders, insulin resistance, and obesity.
The genetic hardware is doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Yep, but the environment has completely betrayed it.
And it's compounded by how little we move. Our ancestors expended massive amounts of physical energy just to procure dinner. Today, I sit in an ergonomic chair for 8 hours.
And the research highlights that this lack of physical exertion, coupled with our modern diet, leads to chronic systemic inflammation. Traditional populations rarely experience this kind of low-grade, constant inflammation.
Why is that exactly?
Because movement isn't just about burning calories, it regulates the immune system.
Right.
When muscles contract, they release anti-inflammatory compounds.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so when you are entirely sedentary, your body is effectively stagnant, which your immune system misinterprets as a sign of potential illness or injury. So it ramps up an inflammatory response.
Okay, so physiologically, our bodies are hoarding fat for a famine that doesn't exist and inflaming themselves because we aren't moving. But I want to pull this back to the psychological side, specifically the brain. Explain survival mode to us.
Sure. In the center of your brain sits a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. It acts as your central defense system and emotional processor.
The panic button, basically.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
When the amygdala detects a threat, it instantly stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. It floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol. This is the famous fight, flight, or freeze response.
So physically, what is happening to me in that moment?
Blood rushes away from your digestive organs and into your limbs so you can run. Your heart rate spikes, your pupils dilate.
Historically, a threat appeared, like a bear. You reacted physically by running away or fighting. The threat was resolved, and the body metabolized those stress hormones.
Right, and then you return to a resting baseline, which biologists call homeostasis. The stress response is designed to be acute, short, sharp, and over.
But here's the problem with modern life. The threats never physically resolve. I mean, the vaguely aggressive email from the accounting department doesn't get punched in the face,
No, it does not.
and I can't physically sprint away from my credit card bill. So what happens to the body?
We get stuck. Because you cannot fight or flee from an abstract concept like a deadline, the physiological stress response is never allowed to complete its cycle.
Wow, so it just lingers.
Consequently, we get trapped in a chronic state of survival mode. We are constantly bathed in stress hormones like cortisol. The brain is tricked into an unnecessary, perpetual state of fear because it fundamentally misinterprets the environment.
It makes me think of an oversensitive car alarm.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's like an alarm system designed to go off if someone actually takes a baseball bat and smashes your car window. But now, the sensitivity is cranked up so high that the alarm is blaring just because a single leaf happened to drift down and touch the windshield.
And the worst part is, we don't have the keys to turn the alarm off.
Right. The hardware of the alarm is functioning flawlessly. It detects contact and sounds the horn, but the context is completely wrong.
That is a brilliant analogy.
But here's what I really don't understand, and I want to push back on this a little. If being stressed out feels so terrible, if chronic cortisol is damaging our bodies and making us miserable, why do our brains keep doing it? Why do we dwell on things?
Well, this brings us to a very dark, counterintuitive twist in the psychological research. Stress and emotional pain trigger a physiological response that includes the release of endogenous opioids, better known as endorphins.
Wait, endorphins, like a runner's high.
Yes, endorphins are the brain's primary pleasure and pain-killing chemicals.
Hold on. You're saying that experiencing pain and stress releases pleasure chemicals.
Yes, it evolved as an emergency coping mechanism. If an early human was attacked by an animal, the brain released a flood of endorphins to numb the physical pain long enough for the person to escape.
So it's an evolutionary painkiller.
Exactly.
Okay, I need to stop you there because that sounds dangerously close to victim blaming. Are you saying that when someone is sitting in bed, agonizing over a mistake they made 5 years ago, or spiraling into a depressive episode, they are doing it on purpose because they secretly enjoy being miserable?
No, absolutely not, and I'm very glad you challenged that. It is crucial to separate conscious, willful choice from unconscious neurobiology.
Okay, that's an important distinction.
Right. The conscious, he hates the feeling of anxiety. You desperately want to sleep. But your brain's unconscious evolutionary hardware operates differently.
How so?
Because endorphin release is inextricably tied to the stress response, any sort of deep stress or emotional pain triggers that chemical release. The research suggests that on a purely neurochemical level, many of us develop an unconscious biochemical addiction to our own distressing emotions.
Oh, wow. So I am consciously miserable, but subconsciously, my brain is giving itself a tiny, hidden chemical reward for dwelling on painful thoughts.
Precisely. We literally get biologically hooked on our own survival mode states. The anxiety becomes a familiar chemical baseline.
And when it drops,
When it drops, the brain actually seeks out things to worry about just to re-trigger that familiar wash of cortisol and endorphins.
okay, that is terrifying, but it also makes so much sense. We have established that our brains are effectively stuck in the past, highly susceptible to this biochemical addiction to stress, and constantly misinterpreting modern life.
It's a tough spot to be in, biologically speaking.
I want to transition here. How does this deep, invisible mismatch actually dictate our daily, mundane behaviors? Let's take some time to decode the specific habits we all kind of hate about ourselves.
I think this is the most empowering part of the research. It is crucial for you, the listener, to understand these evolutionary roots because it completely removes the shame associated with these behaviors.
Yeah, we carry so much shame about this stuff.
We really do. But when you do these things, you aren't broken. You aren't weak. Your brain is simply executing a highly successful survival program in the wrong century.
Let's start with a massive one: anxiety. In modern clinical terms, we constantly pathologize anxiety as a psychological flaw or a disorder that needs to be eradicated.
But evolutionarily speaking, anxiety is hypervigilance. And hypervigilance was a massive life-saving advantage.
How so?
Well, in evolutionary biology, there is something called the smoke detector principle. If a smoke detector goes off when you burn toast, it's highly annoying. That's a false positive.
Right.
But if it fails to go off when your house is actually on fire, you die. That's a false negative.
So evolution vastly prefers false positives.
Exactly. The anxious caveman who heard a twig snap in the forest, assumed it was a leopard, and spent an hour hiding in a tree, survived.
And the chill, relaxed caveman who assumed it was just the wind.
Well, his genes didn't make it into the modern gene pool. Today, the danger is entirely abstract, like waiting for a text back after a first date, or wondering what your boss meant by "let's chat later."
But your body mounts the exact same physiological defense as if the leopard were in the room.
Exactly.
What about anger? We deeply stigmatize anger in civilized society. We are taught to suppress it.
Anger is deeply misunderstood. Anger evolved specifically to help individuals negotiate social conflict and protect their personal boundaries.
So it serves a social purpose.
Yes. In a tribal setting, anger is a crucial pressure tool. It signals to the group, I am being treated unfairly and you cannot exploit me.
How did that differ from hatred? Because they feel similar.
The psychological distinction is vital. Anger is about fixing a relationship or a boundary. You get angry at a partner because you want the dynamic to improve.
And hatred.
Hatred, evolutionarily, is about distancing yourself from a persistent, unredeemable threat. Hatred wants the target removed from the environment entirely. Anger just wants the social contract renegotiated.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's look at the flip side of anger. What does this evolutionary lens mean for something like people-pleasing?
Oh, that's a big one.
Because I know so many people who struggle with a compulsion to appease others, and they often feel profound shame about it. They feel spineless.
They shouldn't feel shame at all. In ancestral times, remember the environment. Small tribal bands of 50 people. In that world, exclusion from your group meant literal physical death.
Because you couldn't survive on your own.
Right, a solitary human could not hunt, forage, and defend against predators alone. Ostracization was a death sentence.
So our brains equate social rejection with physical mortality.
Yes, neuroimaging studies show that the anterior cingulate cortex, the part of the brain that processes physical pain, is also the exact area that lights up when we experience social rejection.
Wow. So people-pleasing, constantly appeasing others, suppressing your own needs to avoid conflict.
These are not personality defects. They are profound survival reflexes designed to ensure you aren't cast out of the tribe into the cold.
Okay, here's my personal favorite from the sources, because it absolved me of so much guilt procrastination.
I think we can all relate to that one.
I have always viewed procrastination as a moral failing, just pure laziness. But the research frames it as energy conservation.
Think about the brain from a purely caloric standpoint. The human brain makes up roughly 2% of our total body weight, but it consumes 20% of our daily energy.
It is a massive calorie hog.
Consequently, it evolved to be incredibly stingy. It avoids expending energy unless it is absolutely necessary for immediate survival or a clear, guaranteed reward.
So when I sit down to write a massive, vaguely defined quarterly report,
Your ancient brain looks at that ambiguous, overwhelmingly complex task and says, hold on, this is going to burn a massive amount of calories, and the immediate survival benefit is totally unclear.
let's save our energy until a tangible threat presents itself.
Exactly. Procrastination isn't laziness. It is the brain resisting unclear demands to conserve fuel.
And then there is social comparison. We all hate that we compare ourselves to others. But historically, knowing your place in the tribal hierarchy wasn't vanity. It was essential survival mapping.
You had to know who had access to the best food, who the optimal mates were, and who you could safely challenge.
Anthropologists talk about Dunbar's number. Right?
Yes, which is the cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships, usually around 150 people. Your brain is designed to map the hierarchy of roughly 150 locals.
But today, I open Instagram, and social media supercharges this. I am no longer comparing myself to the 150 people in my village.
No, you are being exposed to millions of curated, highly edited comparison targets from all over the globe. We are attempting to do ancient survival mapping on a global, impossible scale.
And because everyone else's highlight reel looks better than your behind-the-scenes reality, you constantly perceive yourself at the absolute bottom of the global tribal hierarchy.
Which triggers profound depressive symptoms.
Which leads us perfectly to the ultimate modern irony doom scrolling. We briefly touched on this in the intro, but let's dissect the mechanism. When we doom scroll at 2 a.m., what are we actually doing?
We are essentially standing guard at the edge of the prehistoric camp, scanning the dark horizon for a saber-toothed tiger.
That's such a vivid image.
It's true. Humans evolved with a severe negativity bias. We are hardwired to pay far more attention to negative, threatening information than positive information because missing a threat was fatal.
So when I am scrolling Twitter or a news site, I'm actively hunting for threats.
Yes. And here is where a specific part of the brain called the striatum comes in. The striatum is a key component of the brain's reward system, and it processes dopamine.
Now, most people think dopamine is the pleasure chemical.
But more accurately, it is the seeking and anticipation chemical. It drives you to look for things.
Okay, so the striatum drives the hunt.
Yes. When you are scrolling, anticipating finding important survival information, which today means a terrifying news headline, your striatum releases dopamine.
And when I find it,
When you finally find that catastrophic headline, your brain registers it as a successful hunt. You successfully spotted the threat. You get a little spike of dopamine as a reward.
wait, I get a chemical reward for reading about an impending economic collapse.
You do, because the brain doesn't care if the information is happy. It only cares that you identified a potential threat to your survival.
But the tech algorithms have weaponized this loop.
Exactly. Because you are constantly getting these micro hits of dopamine, your brain's receptors downregulate to try and maintain balance. This leaves you in a state of dopamine deficit.
Which means I feel numb or anxious, driving me to scroll even more just to get back to baseline. It's an addiction loop.
Precisely. You are utilizing an ancient threat detection system in an environment designed by tech companies to infinitely supply you with artificial threats.
Okay, let's take a breath because this paints a pretty intense picture. Modern life is essentially this constant low-level hum of abstract anxiety, chronic inflammation, dopamine deficits, and thwarted survival instincts.
It's a lot to process.
It really is.
Yeah.
Which honestly makes it completely logical why we might secretly fantasize about a scenario where the anxiety finally stops being abstract and becomes tangible.
This brings us squarely to the phenomenon discussed in our sources, apocalyptic longing. And it is vital that we make a clear distinction here.
Right, let's certify that.
Apocalyptic longing is not a death wish. People who daydream about the end of the world do not actually want to die, nor do they want their loved ones to suffer.
Right, it is a secret sense of relief.
Exactly. It is an evolutionary revolt against an environment that provides us with incredible physical safety, but deeply, deeply thwarts our core psychological and biological needs.
The sources introduce a sociological concept here that I want you to break down for us. Existential boredom and something called semiotic alienation. That sounds intensely academic. What does that actually feel like to a normal person?
Let's start with semiotic alienation. Semiotics is the study of signs and symbols. In the modern, highly specialized workforce, most of us do not make tangible things.
We traffic in symbols.
Right. We send emails, we manipulate numbers on a spreadsheet, we attend strategy meetings. We are entirely alienated from the physical fruits of our labor.
If you spend 40 hours a week managing a database, at the end of the week, you can't point to a physical object and say, I made that and it keeps me warm.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And the sources also mention we are alienated from each other, becoming what they call floating monads.
What's a floating monad? That sounds like a jellyfish.
It's a philosophical term borrowed from Leibniz, but used sociologically here. Imagine a monad as a single, isolated, impenetrable unit.
Okay.
To be a floating monad in society means you are completely disconnected from the social fabric around you. You live in an apartment building with 500 other human beings, separated only by drywall, but you don't know a single one of their names.
You are entirely independent, but profoundly alone.
Exactly. So you combine meaningless, abstract work with profound social isolation, and you get existential boredom. The feeling that life is safe, but entirely devoid of inherent value or urgency.
Which we can view through the lens of a highly validated psychological framework called self-determination theory, or SDT. SDT posits that all human beings require 3 innate psychological needs to feel motivated, fulfilled, and mentally well.
Autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Let's break those down and compare how modern life treats them versus how an imagined apocalypse treats them. Let's start with autonomy.
Autonomy is the need to feel that you are the master of your own life, directing your own actions. In the modern world, autonomy is heavily restricted.
Oh, totally.
We are trapped by bureaucracy, dictated by complex legal codes, beholden to credit scores, and managed by rigid corporate hierarchies.
But in the zombie apocalypse daydream, all of that vanishes instantly. There are no credit scores in the wasteland. There is no HOA telling you what color to paint your barricade. You are the absolute sovereign master of your own fate.
Next is competence. This is the human need to feel effective in dealing with the environment. As we just discussed with semiotic alienation, modern labor is incredibly abstract.
You feel incompetent because the systems are too massive to understand or influence.
If the economy crashes, I can't fix it. I am helpless.
Exactly. But in a survival scenario, competence is restored immediately and undeniably. You are cold. You gather wood. You build a fire using friction. You are warm.
The cause and effect are direct, physical, and instantly rewarding to the brain.
And finally, relatedness, the need for connection. We just talked about floating monads and digital isolation, but an apocalypse completely shatters that isolation, doesn't it?
It forces absolute interdependence. You literally cannot survive without the person standing next to you keeping watch while you sleep.
The author Sebastian Junger explores this beautifully in his book Tribe.
He does. He discusses a concept originally formulated by sociologist Charles Fritz called the community of sufferers.
Can you give an example of that?
A classic historical example is the Blitz in London during World War II. When the bombs started falling, psychiatric wards actually saw a decrease in admissions.
Wait, really? A decrease?
Yes, because the disaster instantly erased traditional class, race, and income distinctions. You didn't care if the person next to you in the subway shelter was a banker or a street sweeper?
People were assessed purely by what they were willing to do for the group in that exact moment.
It strips away all the superficial social mapping and satisfies that deep ancestral need for true tribal belonging.
I remember reading in the sources about how during a disaster, people's stress actually shifts. They move from abstract anxiety to tangible stress, and they utilize something called the STOP method. What is that?
STP is an acronym used in survival training. Sit, think, observe, plan. When you are hit with an overwhelming abstract threat like a global recession, your brain's amygdala panics.
But your prefrontal cortex, the logical planner, shuts down because the problem is too big to solve. You get cognitive paralysis.
Right. But if the power grid collapses and I'm freezing in my living room...
You can't fix the national grid, but you can fix your living room.
Exactly. You sit, think, observe, and plan. I need to block the drafts. I need to consolidate body heat. That psychological relief of taking a tangible baby step is profound.
It cures cognitive paralysis by re-engaging the brain's executive functions. You solve the immediate problem in front of you, and it provides undeniable mastery.
You know, it really sounds like we want the apocalypse for the exact same reason people enjoy assembling IKEA furniture.
IKEA furniture. Okay, unpack that analogy for me.
I know it sounds ridiculous, but think about the process. Assembling an IKEA dresser is physically exhausting. The Allen wrench hurts your hand, the instructions are confusing, you might get a little angry at your partner.
Oh, absolutely. It's a test of any relationship.
But you do it because the instructions have a clear, tangible end goal.
Right.
And when you're done, you have a physical wooden table standing in front of you that you built with your hands.
That feeling of concrete completion is so much more satisfying than navigating modern adulthood, where the rules keep changing and you never actually feel finished.
That is incredibly astute. We desperately crave the tangible outcome, the tangible table. We crave the simplicity of cause and effect.
But of course, the grand caveat here is that we don't actually want the world to end. The reality of a societal collapse involves horrific trauma, starvation, lack of modern medicine, and unimaginable suffering.
The daydream leaves out the dysentery.
Right. So we have this massive evolutionary craving for a simpler, tangible, tribal world, but we logically know a real apocalypse would be hell. So how do we satisfy this craving safely?
We simulate it. We simulate the collapse of civilization through art, literature, and pop culture.
And what I found so counterintuitive in the research is that consuming all this dark, depressing, apocalyptic fiction actually makes us mentally healthier. It isn't just morbid wallowing.
Far from it. There was a truly fascinating study published in the science magazine Nautilus, led by a researcher named Colton Scrivener.
What did they do?
His team decided to measure people's psychological resilience during the early, highly uncertain, and very terrifying days of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020.
This was when everyone was locked down, we didn't know how the virus spread, and anxiety was through the roof.
Exactly. And they found something highly counterintuitive. They found that self-identified horror fans and people who scored high on traits of morbid curiosity actually experienced significantly less psychological distress during the pandemic than the general population.
Wow, really?
Furthermore, fans of the specific prepper genres, zombie movies, alien invasions, and apocalyptic films reported feeling tangibly more prepared for the reality of the crisis.
So watching The Walking Dead literally helped people navigate the real-world trauma of a global pandemic better. How?
Scrivener explains this using what psychologists call the tiger cub theory. Think about how young animals play. A tiger cub doesn't play by sitting quietly. It plays by pouncing, biting, and wrestling with its siblings.
It is rough and tumble play.
Why? Because the cub is safely simulating the very real, very dangerous acts of hunting and fighting it will need to survive as an adult.
So humans use frightening fiction as our version of rough and tumble play.
Precisely. We use fiction to vicariously practice emotion regulation. When you sit in a dark movie theater and watch a terrifying scenario unfold, your body genuinely experiences fear. Your heart rate goes up.
But a part of your brain knows you are safe.
By intentionally scaring yourself in a controlled environment, you are essentially going to the psychological gym. You are practicing how to handle fear, how to regulate anxiety, and how to process dread without facing an actual mortal threat.
So essentially, reading a book about a deadly global plague is like taking a psychological vaccine. We are purposefully injecting ourselves with a deadened, fictional version of a catastrophe so that our emotional immune system can build up the necessary antibodies for real life.
That is the perfect way to frame it. It acts as a profound decatastrophizing strategy. It allows the human mind to ponder the absolute worst-case scenario, the total collapse of everything we know, and realize that even in the darkest rubble, humans can still imagine finding meaning, connection, and a way to thrive.
Which perfectly transitions us into the literary critiques from the Maxi Journal that we reviewed. They did a deep dive into several specific modern post-apocalyptic books to see exactly what modern anxieties they were mirroring. I want to spend some real time on these, starting with Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel.
Station 11 is a beautiful entry point. For context, the novel takes place before and after a devastating hyper-lethal strain of swine flu called the Georgia flu wipes out over 99% of humanity in a matter of weeks.
But it isn't a gory zombie slaying book.
No, not at all.
The core of the story follows a nomadic group called the Traveling Symphony. They wander the ruins of the Great Lakes region, but they aren't scavenging for weapons. They are performing Shakespeare and playing classical music for the scattered settlements of survivors.
And that focus is what makes the critiques so rich. What's fascinating about Station 11 is how it treats art and beauty. The guiding motto of the Traveling Symphony, which is actually a quote they took from an old episode of Star Trek, is "Survival is insufficient."
Survival is insufficient. I love that. Meaning, just keeping your heart beating isn't the point of being human.
Exactly. The novel deeply contrasts the pre-collapse world with the post-collapse world. In the pre-collapse world, our world, the characters are depicted as somewhat lost.
They are corporate workers unfulfilled by their jobs, or iPhone zombies staring at screens, completely alienated from the people sitting right next to them on the train.
They are the floating monads we talked about earlier.
Yes, but after the collapse, everything changes. The sheer fragility of life forces people to connect meaningfully. Art, whether it's performing a Midsummer Night's Dream or preserving a hand-drawn comic book called Dr. 11, becomes the vital glue that connects survivors across time and space.
The novel represents a very specific modern wish fulfillment, the desire to escape the numbing artificial pressures of modernity to find true, unmediated beauty and authentic human connection.
Okay, now let's pivot to a book that has a totally different, much darker vibe. Colson Whitehead's Zone 1. On the surface, it is a zombie apocalypse set in New York City. But the critique focuses on this concept of the interregnum. What does that mean?
The word interregnum traditionally means the period of time between the reign of one monarch and the next. In sociological terms, it is the messy, chaotic, often violent space between an old world that is dying and a new world that is struggling to be born.
So it's not the day the bombs fall, but the grueling years afterward.
Yes. And Zone 1 is brilliant because it tackles a psychological concept known as post-apocalyptic stress disorder, or PASD.
The literary critics draw heavy parallels between the events in the book and real-world collective traumas, specifically the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans.
They do, because Zone 1 subverts the romantic wish fulfillment fantasy we saw in Station 11. It shatters the illusion that an apocalypse is a clean slate.
How does it do that?
Well, the protagonist, Mark Spitz, is part of a team clearing zombies out of Manhattan so the government can resettle it. But what he realizes is that the apocalypse didn't erase human flaws. The old bureaucracy, the corporate sponsors, the petty prejudices, the rigid class structures, they all survived the apocalypse.
The systems just violently reorganize themselves.
Exactly. It forces the reader to realize that a disaster does not magically cure human nature. It warns us that hoping for a systemic collapse to fix our social problems is a fool's errand.
Because the surviving humans will just rebuild the exact same flawed hierarchies. That is deeply depressing.
It is a profound critique, though.
That leads to the third book, which deals with an entirely different kind of trauma. The Leftovers by Tom Perrotta. This one deals with a sudden rapture-like event where 2% of the global population simply vanishes into thin air. No
Yeah,
explanation.
they call it the sudden departure. And the brilliance of The Leftovers is that it is not a survival story in the traditional physical sense.
Right, the electrical grid still works, the grocery stores are still stocked.
The trauma is entirely psychological. It explores the agonizing concept of ambiguous loss.
Contrast ambiguous loss with clear loss for me.
If a loved one dies in a car accident, it is tragically painful, but it is a clear loss. There is a body, there is a funeral. Society has thousands of years of established rituals to help you process that grief and eventually reach closure.
Ambiguous loss is when someone goes missing and you have no idea if they are dead, alive, or abducted. The brain cannot process it.
Because there is no ending to the narrative.
Yeah.
And The Leftovers asks, how does a society cope when millions of people experience ambiguous loss simultaneously, and science and religion offers zero answers?
And the answer the book gives is people go crazy. They turn to fringe cults.
They turn to whatever gives them a sense of meaning or ritual. You have the guilty remnant, a cult where members dress entirely in white, take vows of silence, chain smoke cigarettes, and stalk the townspeople just to act as living, breathing reminders of the trauma.
You have others joining the healing hug movement.
It's a profound look at how, when stripped of absolute certainty, humans will desperately, sometimes destructively, construct new meanings and rituals just to manage their grief and pretend things are normal.
Okay, finally, we have to talk about the bleakest book on the list, Cormac McCarthy's masterpiece, The Road. It is just a father and his young son walking through a horrific, ash-covered, post-apocalyptic wasteland.
It is a devastating novel, and to truly understand its purpose, we must contrast it directly with Station 11.
Right, in Station 11, we have the Traveling Symphony, we have Shakespeare. In The Road, there is zero art. There is no music. There is only starvation, cannibalism, and absolute brutality.
Exactly. Why this stark difference? Is McCarthy just a pessimist?
I mean, it certainly reads that way.
No, McCarthy is providing a necessary reality check. The Road serves as a stark cautionary tale that strips away all the cozy romanticism of the apocalypse. It reminds us that art, culture, and even basic human decency are luxuries.
They are the fragile byproducts of a stable society, because you can't worry about reciting Hammered if you haven't eaten in 6 days.
Precisely. Art requires a baseline of caloric security. When you completely remove that baseline stability, human nature does not default to a cozy community rebuilding society together. It defaults to ruthless, violent survivalism.
The Road uses the horror of the wasteland to remind the reader to fiercely appreciate the mundane security and safety of the present world.
Wow. Okay, so pop culture, through these brilliant novels and movies, allows us to play in the ruins safely. We get to process our ambiguous loss, practice our emotion regulation, and ultimately realize that maybe our boring, spreadsheet-filled world isn't so bad after all.
For most of us, yes, the fiction is enough.
But not for everyone.
While most of us are content to just read a paperback or watch a movie, the sources outline a subset of people who are taking their evolutionary mismatch and physically pouring it into millions of pounds of steel and concrete. I want to shift our focus entirely to the architecture of dread. Let's talk about the Doomsday Preppers.
This is where the psychological theories manifest into physical reality. We reviewed a fascinating ethnographic study by geographer Bradley Garrett. He spent time infiltrating and analyzing the subculture of extreme preppers, specifically focusing on a facility located in rural Kansas called the Survival Condo.
The details of this place are unbelievable. It was built by a developer named Larry Hall. It is a retrofitted Cold War-era Atlas F missile silo.
They literally bought an abandoned nuclear silo and converted it into a 15-story, $20 million inverted geoscraper.
It goes straight down into the earth, and it is designed to house a community of up to 75 incredibly wealthy people for a minimum of 5 years, completely cut off from the outside world.
The physical engineering required to achieve that kind of autonomy is extreme. Garrett documents that the facility houses a massive bank of 386 submarine batteries to maintain power.
They utilize military-grade NBC, which stands for nuclear, biological, and chemical air filters that cost $30,000 apiece.
They have subterranean reverse osmosis water systems capable of purifying 10,000 gallons of water every single day.
Now, obviously, you need batteries and water to survive underground, but what blew my mind wasn't the concrete, it was the psychological engineering. Because locking 75 people underground for 5 years is a recipe for insanity.
So Larry Hall actually brought in a consultant who had worked on the original Biosphere 2 project in the 1990s to ensure people wouldn't literally kill each other.
Yes. The Biosphere 2 experiment taught scientists that a closed-loop system isn't just a matter of balancing oxygen and water. It is heavily reliant on social sustainability. You have to engineer the sociology as carefully as the plumbing.
For instance, the community size is strictly capped at around 75 people. And there is a specific reason for that, right?
It directly ties back to Dunbar's number and our hunter-gatherer roots that we discussed in Section 1. Sociologically, 75 to 150 people is the optimal number to form an extended cooperative family unit without the group splintering into hostile competing factions.
Any larger, and you need formal laws and police forces; any smaller, and you lack genetic and skill diversity.
And speaking of skills, every single resident, even if they paid $3 million for their condo, has to cross-train on vital jobs.
Absolutely essential, because if only one person knows how to run the reverse osmosis water pumps and that person dies of a heart attack, the entire 15-story facility perishes. Cross-training prevents a catastrophic collapse of the hierarchy.
But the lengths they go to in order to trick the brain into thinking it isn't buried in a concrete tube are wild. They built a 50,000-gallon indoor pool, a cinema, a rock climbing wall, a shooting range, and the lighting. Can you explain the lighting?
The human circadian rhythm, our sleep-wake cycle, is entirely dictated by the spectrum of light hitting the melanopsin receptors in our eyes. If you are underground, under harsh fluorescent lights, your body stops producing melatonin correctly, leading to severe insomnia and seasonal affective disorder.
To combat this, the survival condo uses specific 3,000-degree Kelvin LED lights. This exact temperature mimics natural sunlight, keeping the residents' neurochemistry stable.
They even have fake windows. In the individual condos where a window would be, there are high-definition screens projecting live feeds of the outside world.
And if the outside world is a nuclear wasteland, you can change the channel so your window shows a live feed of a sunny beach in San Francisco or a pine forest, just so the brain has a sense of time passing.
Now, if we connect this extreme physical architecture to the bigger sociological picture, we can observe a massive cultural shift. Researchers differentiate between the first doom boom and the second doom boom.
Walk us through that history.
During the first doom boom, the JFK era, the height of the Cold War bunkers were primarily state-funded. They were community fallout shelters or massive underground complexes designed to protect government elites. The goal was the continuity of the nation-state.
And the threat was very specific, the Soviet nuclear strike. It was a solid threat.
But today, in the second doom boom, that paradigm has completely flipped.
Entirely. Today, it is a multi-million-dollar private industry driven by neoliberalism.
Okay, let's pause there. Neoliberalism is a heavy academic word. In this specific context, what does it mean?
In this context, based on the critiques in the sources, neoliberalism refers to the shifting of responsibility from the collective state to the individual consumer. It is the privatization of survival.
These wealthy individuals no longer trust the government's infrastructure to protect them. So they are using vast amounts of private capital to effectively secede from the social contract. They are buying their own private salvation.
And the fear driving them is entirely different from the Cold War. They aren't just worried about nukes.
No, they are preparing for what Zygmunt Bauman famously called liquid fear.
Let's explain liquid fear, because I love this concept. If a nuclear bomb is a solid fear, what is liquid fear?
Think of a solid threat like a bear in the woods. You can see it, you know exactly where it is, and you know how to react. That's solid. Now imagine a liquid threat. It seeps under the door, it permeates the floorboards, it is everywhere and nowhere at once.
You can't grab it or punch it.
Liquid fear is the omnipresent, non-specific dread of our modern age. It is the terror of runaway artificial intelligence, the slow collapse of the climate, the fragility of the global supply chain, or a sudden economic depression.
It's the fear of a catastrophic ripple effect, where one tiny thing breaks and the whole system dominoes. But what absolutely fascinates me about the survival condo, considering all this existential dread, is the grocery store.
Ah, yes. The grocery store is the perfect metaphor.
Inside this bunker, deep underground, they built a grocery store. But they didn't just stack pallets of MREs in a concrete room. They intentionally designed it to look exactly like a high-end, normal supermarket.
It has tile floors, beautiful wooden display cases, little shopping carts, and a working espresso machine behind the counter.
The developer explicitly said that if people had to dig through cardboard boxes for their daily rations, the psychological reminder of their situation would make them depressed.
They want people to go down, smell fresh baked bread, grab a coffee, and socialize. Normalcy as an anchor.
Exactly. It's like a morbid luxury cruise ship that can never, ever dock.
But here's the most crucial psychological distinction that Bradley Garrett's ethnography points out. The residents who buy these condos do not view the bunker as a tomb. That is how outsiders view it.
The preppers view the bunker as a chrysalis.
Like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly.
Exactly. It is an architectural vehicle designed specifically to transport them safely through time. They are crossing a threshold of disaster, safely wrapped in their concrete cocoon, with the absolute expectation that they will eventually emerge resurrected into a reset, purified, and potentially improved world.
It is the ultimate multi-million-dollar manifestation of that apocalyptic relief we discussed in Section 3. They are hitting the reset button on society, but they are ensuring they get to do it in absolute luxury.
It satisfies every need we've discussed. It provides absolute autonomy from the fragile grid. It demands competence through cross-training. And it provides intense relatedness within that 75-person tribe.
The bunker is the ultimate cure for evolutionary mismatch, built out of reinforced concrete.
Okay, we have covered a truly massive amount of ground in this deep dive. Let's try to synthesize this entire journey for you, the listener.
We started by looking at our ancestral biology. We recognize that we have brains perfectly optimized for surviving as nomadic hunter-gatherers, but those brains are currently panicking inside modern office buildings, completely mismatched to their environment.
We explored how that evolutionary confusion fuels our daily behaviors. The abstract threats trigger our physical survival mode, leading to chronic anxiety, anger as boundary protection, and the endless dopamine-depleting cycle of doom scrolling as we scan the digital horizon for threats.
We then saw how we attempt to soothe that profound existential boredom and semiotic alienation. Most of us do it safely by consuming apocalyptic media, using fiction as a psychological vaccine to practice emotion regulation and build resilience.
And for a select few, they attempt to soothe that liquid fear by pouring millions of dollars into subterranean arcs, engineering perfect lighting and fake grocery stores, waiting out the interregnum for the great societal reset.
The major takeaway I want you to absorb right now is one of profound self-compassion. If you are feeling overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of the modern world, or if you catch yourself daydreaming about the simplicity of the end of it all, it does not mean you are fundamentally broken.
It means you are a highly evolved, highly successful survivor operating in an environment you simply were not built for. That urge to prep or to doom scroll the news or the sudden desire to run away to a cabin in the woods, that is just an ancient, fiercely protective instinct desperately looking for a safe place to land.
It is the dizzying burden of abstract threats. Simply acknowledging that biological mismatch is the very first step toward regulating it.
And that leaves us with one final lingering thought to explore. We talked extensively about the concept of the interregnum from Colson Whitehead Zone 1, that messy, chaotic space between the old world dying and the new world being born.
Right.
If this apocalyptic longing is ultimately just a fantasy of hitting the reset button so we can finally feel useful, autonomous, and connected to each other again, what would happen if we fundamentally redirected that energy?
How do you mean?
Think about it. What if we took all the millions of dollars spent on submarine batteries and underground cinemas, and more importantly, all the mental and emotional energy we spend every day daydreaming about surviving the ruins, and used it to build a society where we actually felt useful and connected right now?
That is a powerful question.
Maybe the ultimate survival strategy isn't preparing for the end of the world. Maybe it is actively choosing to participate in the one we already have. Instead of waiting for a fictional zombie apocalypse to rescue us from the spreadsheet and our isolation, maybe we just need to actively change the way we live today.